I never thought I'd live to 70, let alone live to 70 and find myself in this mess. When you're young, you imagine that age will bring wisdom, clarity, maybe even peace. Nobody tells you that age also brings a whole new set of fears, that the quiet you expect can turn into something louder than anything youth ever screamed at you. My name is Margaret Ellen Walsh, Maggie to nearly everyone. I live in a modest 2-story house in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The house creaks with history, every floorboard carrying echoes of the life Robert and I built here. Robert, my husband of nearly 50 years, is 74. A good man, a simple man. He reads the newspaper cover to cover every morning, still irons his shirts before Sunday service, and falls asleep in his recliner before the evening news finishes. If loyalty could be bottled, Robert would be its label. Which makes all of this, that afternoon, my secret, my shame, so much worse. Robert has always been steady, but with steady comes predictable. Sometimes predictable can turn into invisible. That's how Samuel slipped through the cracks. Samuel was the delivery man, water, soda, sometimes beer when Robert wanted to stock up before fishing trips. He was younger than my children, maybe late 30s, early 40s, dark hair cropped short, strong arms, a voice with a Georgia drawl that lingered even when he tried to hide it. He had the kind of smile that made you feel remembered. And I hadn't felt remembered in a long time. It happened on a Tuesday. Funny how ordinary days become the markers of your downfall. Robert had left early with his fishing buddies, cooler slung over his shoulder, promising to bring home bass. The doorbell rang just as I was folding laundry, and there Samuel was, sweat glistening on his brow, lifting crates with ease I hadn't seen in years. "You shouldn't be carrying those yourself," I told him. He grinned. "That's why they pay me, ma'am." I should have let him drop the crates by the door, but I didn't. I invited him in for iced tea. One glass turned into two, small talk into laughter, laughter into something heavier, unspoken. And when he reached out, brushed a strand of hair from my face, I didn't pull away. I keep replaying that moment in my head, the hinge moment when my whole life tilted. I could have stepped back. I could have remembered Robert's steady hands, my children's faces, the vows I made in a white dress decades ago. But I didn't. I let loneliness win. Weeks later, when the sickness began, my guilt bloomed into terror. It started one morning with nausea so sharp I had to sit on the edge of the bed and breathe through it. Robert was already downstairs frying bacon. I pressed a hand to my belly, cold sweat prickling my neck. The smell of bacon turned my stomach so violently I gagged into a towel. And in that moment, the thought came unbidden. This feels just like before. Before, 35 years earlier, when Emily had been no bigger than a seed inside me. The nausea, the tenderness, the bloat. My mind screamed it was impossible, but my body whispered otherwise. I told no one. The first test came on Sunday dinner. My 4 children gather at our house every week, their spouses and kids trailing behind them like colorful ribbons. It's noisy, chaotic, the way family should be. That evening, though, every laugh, every clatter of fork against plate grated against me. My stomach churned, my blouse felt tight across my chest, and I caught myself tugging at it nervously. "Mom, you're pale," Emily said, squinting at me from across the table. She's sharp like that, always the first to notice. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. "Didn't sleep much last night." "You sure?" Her eyes narrowed. "You've been off lately." Jomp jumped in before I had to spin another excuse. "She's fine, Em. Don't fuss." I wanted to reach across the table and thank him, but fear tightened my throat. If Emily kept watching me like that, she'd see too much. She'd know. Later, while I cleared dishes, my eldest son Mark touched my shoulder. "Mom, you okay? You've been moving slower." I laughed too loudly. "That's what 70 looks like, honey. Slower." He chuckled, but there was concern in his eyes. I turned away before he could press further. That night, in bed, Robert asked, "You feeling all right? You hardly ate." "Just tired," I murmured, curling onto my side. My hand slid instinctively to my belly, shielding it, though from what I didn't know. The days stretched into weeks, each one marked by new signs that fed my paranoia. My skirts pinched tighter, my breasts felt sore beneath my bra. Worst of all were the flutters, tiny ghostly movements low in my abdomen that stopped me cold in the middle of washing dishes or folding laundry. I'd press my hand there, trembling, half expecting to feel a kick. I avoided the doctor. Robert mentioned my missed checkup once and I lied without blinking. I rescheduled. Just a cold, nothing serious. The lie tasted bitter, but it was easier than the truth. Every phone call became a threat, every glance from my children a silent accusation. I found myself pacing the house at night, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken in years. Lord, don't let this be true. Don't let me disgrace them. I began wearing looser clothes, sweaters over blouses even in July heat. When Emily hugged me goodbye one evening, I stiffened, terrified she'd feel the swelling. She pulled back, frowning. "You're shaking," I said quickly. She didn't look convinced. There were moments I almost confessed. One afternoon, Robert and I sat on the porch, the air thick with the hum of cicadas. He sipped his beer, eyes squinting at the horizon. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, to beg him to forgive me, to share the terror clawing at my insides. But when I saw the deep lines on his face, the years he had given me, the steadiness of his presence, the words died. I couldn't destroy him with the truth. So I carried it alone. But guilt has a way of breeding paranoia. Every glance from Robert felt suspicious, every question from Emily loaded. Once, when my youngest grandson crawled into my lap, pressing his tiny hand against my belly, I nearly screamed. I jerked him away so fast he cried, and the whole family stared at me. "What's wrong, Mom?" Emily asked sharply. "Nothing," I said, forcing a laugh. Their eyes lingered longer than I liked. At night, the dreams grew worse. I dreamed of hospitals, of my children's accusing faces, of Robert turning away in disgust. Sometimes I dreamed of Samuel, his hands on my shoulders, his voice low in my ear. It's hours. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, clutching my belly, unsure if I wanted to scream or weep. The isolation gnawed at me. I stopped answering phone calls from friends. I ducked out of church potlucks, feigning headaches. Even Pastor Jim's sermons couldn't soothe me anymore. Every verse about sin and judgment felt aimed directly at me. I told myself I just needed more time, that maybe the symptoms would pass, that maybe it was all in my head. But deep down I knew. Something was inside me, something that didn't belong. And if my family found out, my life as I knew it would end. I don't know when the fear started living under my skin like a parasite, but by midsummer it had taken over everything. Every creak of the floorboards at night, every glance my children gave me, every question Robert asked, it all felt like an interrogation. The sickness was worse. Some mornings I couldn't get out of bed. The nausea was so sharp. My belly, once just a little rounder than usual, had grown firm, stretched. I knew it wasn't normal aging. I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror, pulling my blouse tight, then loosening it, turning sideways, staring at myself with a mixture of dread and disbelief. Sometimes I'd whisper to the reflection, "You're 70 years old, Margaret. You're not pregnant. You can't be." But the reflection never answered back. One Sunday, at dinner, I nearly broke. The table was crowded, Mark at one end carving the roast, Emily in the kitchen ladling out mashed potatoes, Robert grumbling about the gravy being too thin. The grandchildren's voices rose and fell like a chorus. I was quiet, pushing food around my plate. Every smell made my stomach twist. "Mom," Emily said, suddenly, "you're eating like a bird. Are you sick?" I startled so badly my fork clattered to the plate. The whole table went silent. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just not hungry." "Not hungry for roast?" Mark teased. Laughter rippled, but Emily's eyes stayed locked on me. "She doesn't let go easily." "You've lost weight in your face," she said softly. But your middle looks... She trailed off, frowning. My heart nearly stopped. I slapped my napkin onto my lap. Are you saying I'm fat, Emily? I forced a laugh. The family chuckled uncomfortably, and the moment passed, but I saw the suspicion lingering in her gaze. That night, in bed, beside Robert, I lay awake trembling. Emily knew, or at least she suspected. My own daughter, my baby, would be the one to unmask me. Samuel. I hadn't seen Samuel in weeks. After that day, I had avoided him like the plague. I arranged deliveries for when Robert was home, and when I couldn't, I left the check under the mat. But fate has a cruel sense of humor.
One Thursday, Robert was out getting a haircut, and the doorbell rang. There he was, Samuel, standing on my porch with 2 crates of sparkling water. His smile flickered when he saw me. "Mrs. Walsh," he said, tipping his cap. "Samuel," I breathed, my voice shaking. He carried the crates inside without asking. His presence filled the kitchen, the smell of sweat and sunshine clinging to him. I stood frozen, heart pounding. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. My throat closed. "It's complicated." He set the crates down and turned to me. His eyes softened. "Maggie, I didn't mean for that day to cause you trouble." The sound of my name on his lips made me flinch. "We can't talk about it," I whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but you okay? You look pale." I almost told him everything, the sickness, the swelling, the terror, the words pressed at my lips. But then Robert's car pulled into the driveway. Panic surged and I shoved Samuel toward the door. "Go, please." He left without protest, but the weight of his gaze lingered long after the door closed. The strangest part was how often I found myself at the edge of confession only to retreat. Emily begged me to see Dr. Reynolds. "Mom, you can't keep brushing this off. What if it's your heart?" I faked a smile. "I'll go next week." The next week, I claimed the office canceled, then that I'd rescheduled, then that I'd already gone and everything was fine. Each lie dug the hole deeper. Robert grew irritated. "For God's sake, Maggie, just go. You're acting like a child." I snapped at him, something I rarely did. Maybe I don't want to be poked and prodded like some lab rat. The silence after that was deafening. Robert stared at me, stunned. We'd had arguments before, but not like that. He shook his head, muttered something about stubborn women, and retreated to his chair. I fled upstairs, my chest heaving, guilt crashing over me. I'd never spoken to him that way. Never. But fear makes you cruel. One evening, I was folding laundry when a sharp pain tore through my side. I dropped the shirt, clutching my belly. The room spun. For a terrifying moment, I thought, this is it. I'm going into labor. The rational part of me screamed it was impossible, but the sensation was so real, so vivid, I stumbled to the bathroom and locked the door. I leaned over the sink, gasping, staring at my face in the mirror. Gray, sweat-slicked, eyes wide with terror. A knock rattled the door. "Maggie, you all right?" Robert's voice. I couldn't answer. My mouth opened, but only a whimper escaped. "Maggie!" His knocking grew louder. I forced my voice steady. "I'm fine. Just stomach cramps." "You want me to call Emily?" "No!" The word came out too sharp. Silence followed. Finally, his footsteps retreated. I sank to the floor, pressing my forehead against the cool tile. My whole body trembled. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I thought of my children, my grandchildren, my husband. I thought of Samuel's brief smile. I thought of God's silence. And I whispered the truth for the first time, even if only to the empty bathroom. "I think I'm pregnant." The words tasted like poison. The web tightens.
After that night, I couldn't look my family in the eye. Every conversation felt like a trap. "Grandma, play dolls with me," little Anna begged one afternoon, holding out her tiny hand. I recoiled, clutching my sweater around me. "Not today, sweetheart. Grandma's tired." Her lip quivered. Emily's eyes burned holes through me. Robert grew colder, too. "You've been secretive," he said one morning, staring at me over his coffee. "What are you hiding?" I froze. "Nothing." His gaze lingered, heavy, before he turned the page of his newspaper. But the damage was done. He suspected. I began avoiding even the grocery store, afraid the neighbors would notice my swelling belly. I shopped late at night, hunched over, hiding under oversized coats. I felt like a criminal. The walls of my life were closing in inch by inch. I knew it couldn't last. It happened on a sweltering August afternoon. I was weeding the garden, sweat dripping down my temples, when the dizziness struck. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the dirt. Robert rushed out, shouting my name. He hauled me up, his face twisted with fear. "That's it. You're going to the hospital." "No!" I cried, thrashing in his arms. "Maggie, enough. You're scaring me." His voice cracked. I sobbed, clinging to him. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." But I couldn't. The words died on my lips. He carried me inside, his jaw set. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, heart racing. I knew I was out of time. Whatever was happening inside me would soon be undeniable. And when the truth came out, when they discovered my secret, I would lose everything. The morning it all came undone began like any other. Sunlight filtering weakly through the curtains, Robert rattling around downstairs with his coffee. I woke with the familiar heaviness in my stomach, but this time something was different. My belly felt stretched to bursting, my skin taut as though it might tear. Every breath was shallow, squeezed out of me by the swelling beneath my ribs. I tried to sit up and nearly fainted. The room tilted. Black spots swam before my eyes. "Maggie!" Robert's voice called up the stairs. I swallowed hard, fighting panic. "I'm fine," I croaked, though my chest burned with the lie. But I wasn't fine. Not anymore. By noon, the pain had sharpened, a twisting ache that made it hard to walk. I shuffled to the living room, clutching my belly, sweat dripping down my temples. That was the moment Emily arrived, unannounced, with her brood in tow. "Maggie," she said, freezing in the doorway. Her children darted past her, but her eyes were locked on me, on the way I hunched over, one hand pressed to my swollen abdomen. My heart stopped. "Maggie," she repeated, her voice sharp. "What's going on?" Robert entered from the kitchen, face grim. "I've been asking the same damn thing." The room spun. My children, my grandchildren, my husband, all their eyes were on me. I felt naked, exposed. The secret I had carried so long, bubbling to the surface. My throat closed. Words tangled inside me. Emily's face hardened. "Are you pregnant?" The world went silent. Even the children froze, sensing the weight of her words. I gasped, stumbling back. No, that's impossible." But my denial sounded weak even to me. Robert's face turned red, veins bulging in his temples. "What the hell is she talking about, Maggie?" It's not." My voice cracked. Tears burned my eyes. "I don't know what's happening." "You don't know?" Emily shouted. "Look at you. You're hiding something." The room erupted. Questions, accusations, confusion. My grandchildren stared at me wide-eyed, their innocence cutting deeper than any words. Finally, my knees buckled. I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. "Please, I don't know what's wrong. I'm scared." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. They didn't give me a choice. Robert bundled me into the car while Emily called ahead. I wept quietly in the passenger seat, my arms wrapped around my belly as if cradling the very thing I feared.
The hospital smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Nurses swarmed around me, lifting, prodding, attaching wires. I flinched at every touch, certain they would confirm my worst fear. "She thinks she might be pregnant," Emily whispered to a nurse, her voice tight, with shame. The nurse blinked and then glanced at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. At 70? My cheeks burned. I turned my face to the wall. They wheeled me into an exam room. A doctor, young, with kind eyes, knelt beside me. "Mrs. Walsh, can you tell me what's been happening?" My lips trembled. I wanted to confess everything. The afternoon with Samuel, the sickness, the terror, but all that came out was a choked whisper. "I thought I was carrying a baby." The expression softened, but his voice was steady. "We'll run some tests, okay? Let's see what's going on." The hours dragged like centuries. Robert sat rigid in the corner, fists clenched on his knees. Emily paced, her face pale. My sons arrived too, their voices low and tense. I could feel their judgment hanging in the air, unspoken but suffocating. I clutched the thin hospital blanket, rocking slightly. Every beep of the monitor echoed like a hammer. What if it's true? What if they tell me I'm pregnant? The thought of it, the humiliation, the betrayal carved in Robert's face, the disgust in my children's eyes, was almost worse than death. I prayed silently, bargaining with God.
Please, not this. Anything but this. Finally, the doctor returned, clipboard in hand. His expression was calm, professional. "Mrs. Walsh," he said gently, "you are not pregnant." The words crashed over me like cold water. Relief flooded me so fast I nearly sobbed aloud. The confusion followed quickly. Then what's happening to me? The doctor pulled up a chair. "You have fluid buildup in your abdomen, ascites. It's what's been causing the swelling and discomfort." "Fluid?" I whispered. He nodded. "It can result from several conditions: heart issues, liver problems, even kidney complications. We'll need to run more tests to determine the cause. But I want to be clear, you are not pregnant." Not pregnant. The phrase echoed in my skull. Not pregnant, not carrying Samuel's child, not facing the ruin I dreaded. I broke down then, sobbing into my hands, the tension of months spilling out in jagged gasps. My children stared, stunned. Robert's face was unreadable. Later, when the nurses left and the machines quieted, Robert finally spoke. His voice was low, ragged. "Why didn't you tell us you were sick?" I couldn't lift my eyes. I was afraid. Afraid of what? His voice cracked, sharp with pain. Of you, of them, of the truth. The words tangled on my tongue. Emily stepped closer, her eyes wet. "Mom, you thought you were pregnant? At 70? The shame was unbearable. I nodded, unable to speak. Her face twisted, half pity, half disbelief. "Why didn't you just say something?" Because the truth was uglier than any diagnosis. Because admitting what I had done, who I had been with, would have shattered us all. But I said none of that. I only whispered, "I'm sorry." That night, alone in the hospital bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of machines. The relief of not being pregnant was immense, but it was tangled with something darker. I had built my own prison out of fear and secrecy. I had almost destroyed myself, and my family, not with pregnancy, but with silence. And beneath it all, the guilt remained, not for the phantom child that never existed, but for Samuel, for the betrayal that was real, no matter what the tests said. The fluid could be drained, the body healed, but the cracks in my marriage, the questions in my children's eyes, those would linger. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, one truth echoed louder than the rest. I had been terrified of carrying new life, but what truly haunted me was the life I had already lived and the choices that could never be undone. The morning after the diagnosis, the hospital felt unnaturally still. The chaos of the previous night had ebbed away, leaving a hush that seemed to settle into my bones. Nurses came and went, adjusting drips, checking monitors, speaking in practiced calm. Robert sat by the window, his hands folded tight, eyes fixed on the pale dawn. He hadn't spoken to me since the doctor left the night before. His silence was worse than shouting. Finally, I whispered, "Robert." He didn't move. "I thought I was protecting you," I said, my voice trembling. "Protecting all of you." His head turned, slow and deliberate. His eyes were rimmed red. "By lying?" The word cut. I flinched. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to explain." "You thought you were pregnant?" he cracked. "At 70? Maggie, do you understand how insane that sounds?" Tears spilled down my cheeks. I know how it sounds, but it felt real. The nausea, the swelling, the cravings, and the fear. God, the fear! He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Fear of what? Of you, of Samuel, of everything I'd done, but I couldn't bear to say it. Not yet. So I whispered, of losing all of you. His jaw tightened, but his shoulders sagged as if the fight had drained out of him. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he reached across the bed and took my hand. His grip was rough, unsteady, but it was there. And for the first time in months, I breathed without trembling. Emily came alone later that day. She closed the door softly behind her, her expression unreadable. "Mom," she said, standing at the foot of the bed, "I don't know what to say." Neither did I. I stared at my hands, ashamed of the IV lines and bruises that mapped my skin. She sighed and sat down. I was angry, still am a little, but mostly I'm scared. You should have told us something was wrong. We could have helped. "I didn't want to burden you," I whispered. Her laugh was sharp, but not unkind. "You're my mother. Burdening me is your job." I smiled weakly. Her gaze softened. "When I thought you were pregnant, I didn't know how to process it. I was embarrassed. For you. For us." The shame welled again, hot and choking. "But then last night," she continued, her voice quieter, "when the doctor said it was fluid, not a baby, I realized how much you've been suffering, alone." I blinked through tears. She reached out, covering my hand with hers. "No more secrets, okay? Whatever it is, your health, your fears, we face it together." Her touch was warm, her words a balm I hadn't known I needed. For the first time, I felt the possibility of forgiveness. The days that followed were a blur of tests and treatments. They drained the fluid from my abdomen, the relief almost euphoric. Breathing came easier, the pressure eased, but the emotional weight remained. At night, alone in the sterile dark, Samuel's face haunted me. His laughter, the way his eyes had met mine across the garden that afternoon, the fleeting madness of desire. I had told no one, not Robert, not Emily, not the doctor. The secret still clung to me like a stain. But the difference now was choice. For the first time, I wondered if keeping silent was truly protection or just cowardice. On my 5th day in the hospital, Robert finally asked the question I had been dreading. "Maggie," he said, his voice low, "why did you think you were pregnant?" The world stilled. I stared at him, my heart pounding so loud I thought the monitors would betray me. "I don't know," I whispered. He studied me for a long time, his eyes searching mine. Then he shook his head, as though he'd decided not to press further. Relief and guilt washed over me in equal measure. He didn't know. He might never know. And maybe that was mercy. But as I watched him doze in the chair beside my bed, his hand still clutching mine, I realized something. Forgiveness could not live in a house built on lies. If I wanted peace, truly, I would have to face the truth. All of it. It was Emily I told first, late one evening when the others had gone home and the ward was quiet. "I need to tell you something," I whispered. She looked up from her phone, brows furrowed. "It wasn't just the swelling. There was a man," she said, voice shaking. "Samuel, the gardener. It was one afternoon, and it was wrong, and it's haunted me ever since." The words spilled out like poison, burning my throat, leaving me trembling and raw. Emily sat frozen, shock etched on her face. I thought the sickness, the swelling, it meant him, that I was carrying his child. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I was terrified you'd all find out, terrified of losing everything. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, she whispered, "Oh, Mom." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even disappointed. It was broken. She stood, pacing, running her hands through her hair. "Do you know what this means for Dad? For us?" I nodded, sobbing. "I know. I hate myself for it." She sank into the chair, head in her hands. "You need to tell him. He deserves to know." "I can't," I whispered. "It'll destroy him." Her gaze snapped to mine, fierce and unyielding. "Keeping it will destroy you." The truth hung heavy between us. In the end, I never told Robert. Maybe that was cowardice. Maybe mercy. Maybe both. I told myself it was enough that Emily knew, that I had spoken the truth aloud, that the secret was no longer festering alone in the dark. Robert and I returned home weeks later, my body frail but healing. He was attentive, gentle, his silence about the past months unbroken. We never spoke of pregnancy again, never of Samuel. But sometimes when I caught Robert watching me with quiet sorrow in his eyes, I wondered if he knew anyway. Life didn't return to normal. How could it? But it settled into a new rhythm. Doctor's visits, medication, family dinners where laughter returned slowly, like the sun after a storm. Emily remained close, protective in a way she hadn't been before. The boys visited more often too, as though afraid to let time slip unnoticed. And Robert, he stayed. That was enough. Some nights I still woke sweating, Samuel's ghost in my dreams, but I no longer mistook the past for the future. The swelling had been fluid, not life. The fear had been mine, not fate's. I had not been pregnant, but I had been guilty. And in the end, perhaps that was the harder burden to bear. Now, years later, as I sit in the garden where it all began, I can finally breathe. The roses bloom, the grass sways, and I am old, frail, but alive. I think often of that phantom child, the one that never was. I imagine its face, its laughter, the chaos it might have brought. And I thank God every day that it was only fluid. But I also know this: secrets rock in silence. They eat at the bones of love. If I could go back, I would not fear the truth so much. I would not carry it alone until it nearly killed me. Because in the end, it wasn't pregnancy or illness that almost destroyed me. It was fear. And I will not let fear have the last word